I'm Deborah Price, a League member from Wayzata, Plymouth area. This forum is being sponsored by the West Metro Alliance, which includes the local leagues of Brooklyn Park, Osseo, Maple Grove, Crystal, New Hope, East Plymouth, Golden Valley, Minnetonka, Eden Prairie, Hopkins, St. Louis Park, South Tonka, and Wayzata, Plymouth. The League of Women Voters is an educational organization organized at the local, state, and national level to encourage citizens to participate in government. While we study and take stands on issues, we never endorse or support political parties or candidates. We do encourage our members as individuals, as we encourage each of you to become involved in your community and the political party of your choice. I would like to remind you that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization, and the views of the speakers are her own. League of Women Voters does not assume responsibility for the contents of the speaker's statement. Today's program is about voting reform measures. The League of Women Voters Minnesota's priorities for the 2013 session are protecting and improving voting rights and Minnesota's election system. To modernize access to the ballot box, we support early voting, which allows voters to cast their ballot in the days before Election Day and reduces congestion on Election Day, and online voter registration, which makes it easier for many citizens to register and saves counties money for processing registrations. Our speaker today is Claire Wilson, Voter Outreach Director from the Minnesota Secretary of State's office. In her role with the office, Claire travels statewide, encouraging participation in the electoral process and educating eligible voters about election law. She presents workshops on voting to schools, community groups, and partners with nonprofits to keep communities current on Minnesota's leading election system. Ms. Wilson will speak on the pros and cons of various voting measures. And when the time comes for questions, if you would please go to the microphone to the side. Thank you. Ms. Wilson.
Hi. Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Can you hear me okay? All right, well, after that introduction, I'll be sure not to say anything too incinerary, or I'm also nonpartisan, so we're in good shape. If you want to know who I think you should vote for, you can meet me in the parking lot after this, and I'll be happy to tell you. But I do work for the Secretary of State's office, and Secretary Ritchie sends a big hello this morning. He loves the League, as you know. And we are in the thick of it at the Capitol right now in terms of election reform and just in terms of where we are in session right now. So I thought that we could just do kind of a brief overview of the things that are active right now that are making their way through the legislature and that will be voted on at the end of session, or not voted on, depending on how things fall down. And then talk a little bit about non-legislative priorities and actions that are also happening sort of concurrently. And hopefully give you some of the pros and cons, and also maybe we can have a little discussion about what you'd like to see move forward. So right now we're at the point in session when deadlines have passed and kind of what's active is active. So what's going to move forward right now is moving forward. And we have two omnibus bills, which means that everything's kind of wrapped into these two big bills. And one's in the Senate and one's in the House. Now, how many of you are from St. Louis Park? All right, great. So, you know, Representative Simon is the elections lead, and then Senator Sieben in the Senate is the Senate lead on elections. She is having another baby, so she's gone now, I think, but they've been the champions thus far. So the first and probably biggest thing that we have moving forward are talking about some voting reforms for voting prior to Election Day. So how many of you have ever voted absentee before? Okay. Oh, good, everybody. How many of you are election judges? I knew it. Okay, great. That's great. Okay, good. So you have all had a good excuse for voting absentee, right? And you know that in Minnesota we have to have an excuse to vote absentee. This puts us really at this point in the minority of states. Most states, 32 other states, including all of our neighbors, no longer require an excuse for absentee voting. So in Minnesota, you have to, provide an excuse. You fill out the form, then you fill out the other form, and then you vote, and then you put all the pieces of paper together and mail them in. Or you go in person and do it. And then have any of you actually served on ballot boards in, okay, so you all know what happens next, which is like crazy. So, I mean, it is. Let's just call it. It's really difficult work. So all of these absentee ballots come into the county auditor's office because we centralized the process a few years ago. And these envelopes have to be accepted or rejected. They have to be processed. If an envelope is rejected, then they have to resend a ballot to the voter. They have to be entered into the system so that you can track your absentee ballot, because as you all may know now, we have a module where you can go on our website and see if your ballot's been accepted or rejected, or if another ballot's been sent to you, which if you don't know about that, check it out. It's really fun. It's fun for 2 minutes, but I'm an election geek. I think it's really fun. So you can go check the status of your absentee ballot online. And then, the ballots are then placed to the side. Nothing's processed or counted, of course, until Election Day. So all of this process is estimated per ballot to take about 15 minutes. Now, there are staff that are being paid during those minutes. There are absentee ballot boards that are being paid during those minutes. Edina estimates that per ballot, their absentee process costs them about $20 a ballot. That's a little bit on the high end. Joe Mansky in Ramsey County estimates about $8 a ballot. So regardless, this is a costly process. And for the voter, I can tell you from working the phones at the office, we have multiple calls of people who are terribly confused by the multiple forms and envelopes, and they don't know if they should do this or that, and I kind of walk them through it. But what we're looking for is an experience that will cut down on this for the voter and for the local election official. So there are two proposals currently moving forward. The first is no excuse absentee, which means that you would not have to come up with an excuse to vote absentee. I mean, currently the excuses, right, are illness or away from the precinct or disability or religious reasons for not going into the precinct or into the polling place. We know that not everybody is completely truthful when they check these boxes. And we don't want people to have to lie. And it's just an additional obstacle, both for the voter and for the local election official. No excuse absentee voting has wide support in the legislature. It seems to be moving forward without any significant opposition, which is wonderful. We would be very happy to see it implemented. What you have to think about, though, as that moves forward is that is going to increase the number of people who are going to vote absentee, right? We estimate at least conservatively 50% more people will vote absentee. Currently, already, people think that it's early voting, right? They get a little confused about what that process means and is. So that is going to increase this cost and this burden on our local election officials, certainly. So moving concurrently with no excuse absent voting is early voting. Now, in early voting, you go to the county auditor's office or maybe to the city of St. Louis Park, which I think is designated absentee voting, right? So you would come here to the city hall in the 15 days prior to the election. You would receive your ballot. It would act just like a polling place. You would come in, sign the roster, receive your ballot, vote your ballot, and put it in the machine. And you're done. That is basically free. I mean, there are costs associated with needing the tabulators there. There's going to be additional staff cost. But in terms of the processing of the ballots and voter confidence, because you know you put it through the machine, you saw it go through, you're done, you go home, you vote it. So every other state, with the exception of New Jersey, who's implemented early voting, has also implemented no excuse and vice versa. Because the no excuse increases the absentee voting so much that you need a period where people can just come in and vote directly. Early voting is facing more challenges and does not have wide bipartisan support, which, as you all may know, the governor has said that he will not sign any election law into law unless it has bipartisan support. And so the cons, so the pros of early voting are it's a cost savings measure. It increases voter confidence. It increases voter participation to some degree, though it's not really clear how much. I mean, I think in Minnesota we already have such a high level of voter participation. I'm not sure that more will participate, but I think more will participate differently and will reduce the congestion in the polling places, which you as election judges can testify. I don't know if in your areas, but I know, at least in the city, the polling places were very congested this last presidential election. Some of the cons that have been raised around early voting are that they're not going to be able to put challengers in all the county auditors and city clerk's offices the way that they are in polling places on Election Day. And some of the opponents have said that that means it lacks citizen oversight. There are some cons as to people feel like once that ballot is cast, you can't pull it back. So your vote is your vote, and you can't get it back. Whereas if you vote absentee, you still have an opportunity to have your ballot spoiled and get a new ballot. Now, this happens fairly rarely. I think in Minneapolis there was one vote that someone asked to get back. And essentially, those have been the arguments against. So it is facing some challenges, and it's not certain that it will move forward. It's in the Senate, it's included in the omnibus bill. In the House, it is moving separately. So if you support early voting, this would be a good time to maybe contact your representatives and your senators and let them know that you do support it. So those are two major reforms which are moving through right now. Like I said, no excuses in both omnibus bills. It's looking like, at least in the House, the omnibus bill has bipartisan support. So it's looking like there's some hope for no excuse absentee voting. The other major issue which has sparked a lot of passion in communities is the issue of felon voting rights during this session. Now, as many of you are aware, if you have been convicted of a felony in Minnesota and you have served time and are on probation, your civil rights are revoked until you're off paper. So until you're totally done with your sentence. Now, someone can be on parole for 10, 15, 20 years. You can be on parole for a long time. And you're otherwise out in the community acting as a citizen, and occasionally people think that they have their voting rights, they go and they vote. And this, of course, is not legal. And once we catch them, because we'll run a match later on with the voter list and the probation list, it's a felony conviction, and they go back to jail, which is unfortunate from a human side. From a cost side, it's also cumbersome because county attorneys are spending a lot of time chasing after people who voted, essentially. And it's a lot of work because you have to prove that they did it knowingly, and you got to find them, which it turns out, I did not know, but they don't have everybody totally localized in the probation system. And county attorneys, according to current law, don't really have discretion in terms of who they investigate. They have to investigate any claim that's brought before them. So I don't know if y'all have been following the case of the woman in Nicollet County. Yeah, I know, like really unfortunate. And they have to pursue because the law tells them so. So we've been working with the county attorneys and with the legislature to address that. The discretion in terms of prosecution for county attorneys. But, there's two ways to approach this issue. One is that it is, in terms of, if you want to talk about election integrity, this is where we have a problem. This is the majority of, quote, voter fraud is, felons who vote not knowing that their civil rights have been revoked. So there's two models that were sort of pursued this year. One is the North Dakota model. And it's only called that because North Dakota has this in their state. But that's where if you're in prison, you lose your right to vote. And if you're out of prison, you get to vote. And it's just, that's the deal. So, there's very little confusion. If somebody walks into your polling place, they're clearly not in jail, and you can give them a ballot. And it helps them. I mean, it's a bright line for everybody. And a county attorney can track somebody down. It negates a lot of this confusion. The North Dakota model did not move forward this year in session, so it made it through two hearings in the House. It passed through one committee and then only received an informational hearing in Representative Simon's committee. So moving concurrently with that, and what is included in the omnibus bill is a bill that does address the county attorney's discretion in prosecution, and a bill that would require notification to people who are out in the community who might be serving probation. So that notification would come both from our office to tell them, please don't vote, you've had your civil rights revoked, or, your civil rights have been restored and you can vote. This is good. It's a positive step forward, but it's still a little complicated because we have a very low level of incarceration in Minnesota and a very high level of people on probation. So, like I said, tracking these folks down, making sure they get notified, this is going to be difficult work and costly work. But that is moving forward. And like I said, it's at least a positive step forward. In terms of notification. It will also allow for increased data sharing between the courts and the county corrections and the corrections officers and our offices, which should be helpful in terms of keeping the voter rolls accurate with challenges applied to people's names. It's not the bright line that the North Dakota model would present. And so, but like I said, it's what's moving forward at this point. So there's also a few other things included in the omnibus bill that are of interest. One is that they have decreased the number of vouchers. So as you all know as election judges, you can currently, an individual can vouch for up to 15 people. That has now been reduced to 8, as it currently is in the bill. And we should think about that a little bit. And I think that there is... I believe that it will most likely stay at 8, but again, there's always things that can be bargaining areas, and this may be one of those. So the pro, of course, is that when you increase the number of vouchers for an individual, and this does not impact the residential facility voting, right? So residential facilities still can vouch for staff can still vouch for as many people as they need to, right? This is just for individuals. Now, honestly, not that many people vouch for up to 15 people. We know that. The rule was in place. It was a bipartisan agreement when it passed originally. It used to be limitless. They put the limit of 15 on it. I know from answering the phones that lots of people utilize vouching as a mechanism, as a proof of residence. And so we're really watching that closely to make sure it stays at 8 at this point. And that would be another thing that if you're interested in to talk to your legislator about, just that whether you support the limit. The cons to that are, well, who's really coming in to vouch for 15 people? And are we tracking that? And the answer is yes, it's tracked in the polling place. You all know that as election judges. And, typically it's households that are vouching for people within the households, people in college who they're living there, they're not getting utility bills in their names. There's also a few shelters that act as homeless shelters that don't fall under the residential facilities statute. And so they are also utilizing their staff and their people who live in the residence to vouch for people in the residence. And often that can be up to 15 people, and certainly up to 8. So that's something to watch. There's also been movement towards, within that same bill, there's a local election officials bill that includes lots of kind of cleaning up language about the color of ballots. I mean, we still have language in statute that refers to the canary ballot and the pink ballot and all these different colors of ballots. So they're cleaning that up, and they're working on the laws about, public notice and posting, because right now it's that you have to put things in the newspaper, post them on your wall at the city hall, and we have computers now and the internet, so we're looking at making sure that people are posting that on the website and making it available that way in that bill. The local election officials, the county auditor's bill is really a lot of sort of mundane kind of in the weeds election stuff, but it's in both omnibus bills, and it looks like it's moving forward. It contains a lot of cost savings measures for the counties that aren't particularly fun to talk about, but which are good to have out there. The other thing that's in the omnibus bill is increasing, or rather sort of decreasing, the number of people in a township that's needed so that they can vote by mail. So a lot of townships vote by mail now, and some cities. So reducing that threshold so that more people can participate that way has been really useful to towns who ask the counties to help them run their elections, or cities. And we'd love to see the threshold sort of gone in general so that more people can participate in mail balloting. And that's where, of course, you don't apply for the ballot. If you're a registered voter in that city or town, you just get a ballot. You vote it and you mail it back. It's a good cost savings measure. People who are in mail balloting precincts love it. And in that bill, we've asked for additional money so that we can put into SVRS, which is the statewide voter registration system, a mail balloting module, because there's not currently a way to track mail balloting in the same way that there is to track absentee voting. So this will allow local election officials a little bit more freedom in terms of processing and administering mail balloting. And that is also in the omnibus bill and looks like it's moving forward. Now back to when we were talking about early voting, some people talking about, well, I don't want people to be able to come in 15 days ahead of time and cast a vote because what if something changes in the last minute? What if somebody dies? What if, there's a scandal and they want to pull their vote back? And this, of course, has come up before. We know that when Senator Wellstone passed away, there was difficulty with how that was going to be addressed in law. We had a candidate in Duluth this time around who had to withdraw during the withdrawal after withdrawal period. So we do have something which in election speak is called vacancy and nomination, which essentially means if somebody dies, what do we do? And in this instance, what we would do is that race would become null on the ballot. The new proposal would mean that if someone dies in the days leading up to the election before after the primary, then the race on the ballot would become essentially null. You wouldn't vote on that race, and a special election would be held. If the candidate died before the primary, the party would still have time to nominate someone new to go onto the ballot. That's a partisan vacancy and nomination. A nonpartisan vacancy and nomination would be fairly similar, only the special election would be up to sort of the charter of the city, or because this also happened in Rochester. The city council person died early in summer. There was and since it was a nonpartisan vacancy, there was no way to get a new name on the ballot. The family actually decided to campaign for him, even though he had died. He won the election, and they had to hold a special election. So this was quite the uproar down in Rochester. And so we're looking at both the nonpartisan and the partisan vacancy and nomination process. And it is actually an important process to pay attention to, because even though it's rare, when it does happen, it causes significant difficulties. And like I said, in Senator Wellstone's case, there was the whole problem of people who voted absentee and didn't get time to anyway. So this would clarify that process, and it's moving forward. It's also in both omnibus bills, so that's good. The other thing moving forward right now is electronic poll books. And there's a lot of, so let's go pro and con of electronic poll books. So the pro is that, according to this bill, it's in a little bit different shape right now in the House and the Senate, but the basic gist is that it would allow jurisdictions that want to have poll books in their polling places for the purposes of voter registration, so that if I came in to register to vote on Election Day, I would give you my license, you would swipe it, it would populate the form with my information, I would sign and move along. Of course, there's many reasons why this is beneficial. One is that it's going to save the time in the polling place of having someone fill out the form and you checking the proofs of residence and then taking that paper form and bringing it back to the county auditor and then spending 400 days getting all of these Election Day registrants entered into the system. That's one benefit. The other benefit is that in the counties where they've done it, so they did, is Wayzata included in this group? No, right? They are. No, is anybody from what? They have electronic poll books at this point. And David Maeda, their city clerk, things got a little crazy before this presidential election. He's like, oh, we're just not going to do it. I don't have time to, program all these poll books or whatever. And there was mutiny on the part of the election judges. So he had to they all came in one day and quickly did everything and it got them out. But what's happened is in the jurisdictions where we've used it, the election judges love it. So this would also establish a pilot program so that it would go in a few jurisdictions for 2013, very limited in some city elections, and then would look at a mock election, sort of a mock election where we could test out some other functionality for the poll books later on after that election. So before a statewide election, there'd be a few attempts to kind of work out some of the kinks. It would be costly. I mean, we'd have to purchase poll books and do the training, but the thought is that that would sort of offset then the cost later affiliated with or associated with processing the election day registrants. And again, this is aimed at decreasing congestion in the polling places, streamlining the process. Frankly, it's probably only a matter of time until there are electronic poll books in polling places.
But just to clarify, you're only talking about same-day registration, correct?
At this point, yes.
Yeah.
There's been various variations of the bill, and there is talk of wanting to have the books be also, have the actual poll book be online. And again, we're talking about having them online, not necessarily interconnected. So they wouldn't be speaking to each other. The information would be uploaded into your poll book. You would take your poll book to the polling place. There was a lot of talk last year during the photo ID debate about interconnected poll books where you could automatically check to see if someone was a felon or if someone had voted in another precinct. And that's not really, that's not feasible. We couldn't have SVRS up in every single polling place. And two, some polling places are grading sheds in the middle of nowhere. I mean, there's not. So this particular version of the bill allows for some flexibility in terms of jurisdictions. It names a few jurisdictions that have to pilot the program. It's a mix of urban and sort of middle urban mid-sized precincts. In the Senate, in the House, it's in the omnibus bill. In the Senate, it's moving separately. I think with the assumption that it will probably be included in the omnibus bill at some point. In the House, early voting is moving by itself. It's not in the omnibus bill, so it's not currently kind of protected, if you will, in that shell. Also moving separately in the House right now is the early primary bill. Now this would move the primary to June, to early June. Lots of pros and cons to this. And there is very divided support among the legislature for this. Kurt Doubt, who is the lead Republican in the House, has said it's his top priority. And there are some prominent Democrats who also support early primary, and there's some who are very opposed. This is the same in both parties. So, moving the primary to June gives the selected candidates more time to run, more time to campaign right through the summer, and sort of condenses the caucus and nomination process so that, they would be selected at their caucus in February. The primary would happen in early June. From our standpoint, it's a little complicated just because we have to be thinking back to filing periods, to when we get everybody on the ballot. So that pushes everybody's work back into March and April, which is when local election officials who, most of them, in addition to running elections, run taxes. So this runs into their work. They're all on these kind of cycles where their work is taxes, elections, taxes. So this would sort of condense it for them. The other piece of that is that, if you're a major party candidate, it's not too big of a deal, right? Your party nominates you and you get put on the ballot. If you're a minor party or not a named party, right, you have to go collect signatures to get on the ballot. So those folks are going to be collecting signatures in March rather than in June, which is more difficult to kind of get around, as you know, in winter we're all like this, and who wants to door knock? So, we're trying to keep sort of the experience for everyone in light here. So we have not been supportive of the early primary. It is in the omnibus bill on the Senate side. It is moving separately in the House side. So both the early primary and early voting are kind of moving together in the House separately. And like I said, they're both divisive, and they both have a lot of passionate discussions around them, and I'm happy to answer questions about either of them. Non-legislatively, we're looking at, There's also some other processes that we're looking at. Of course, one is online voter registration, which would be fantastic because it would allow you to go online and register to vote. And as you know, some of the bulk of the work for our local election officials is processing all of these paper voter registrations. And, when you're processing that many voter registration, there's room for human error. There's room for both error in the voter's part in terms of transposing numbers, and there's potential for error for the local election officials, particularly on election day, when you're running people through there like crazy, and then when the county auditor gets the voter registration application, they can't read it, and postcards come back, and it just starts this whole process. So with online voter reg, someone who could go online, register to vote, get their confirmation, it would go immediately into the system so that it would go in as typed. It would generate a postal verification card, and then the same process would be in place. The assumption with this is that it would decrease the number of election day registrants as well, because more people would have access earlier and would go ahead and do it. I mean, this won't cut down on the number of people who moved in that little window of time before the election, or who just couldn't pull it together to do it. But it would be really beneficial to the voter and to local election officials. That did not have traction necessarily legislatively this year, so our office is also just looking at different ways that it could possibly be implemented. And then the other piece to all of this is just continuing to think about election judge recruitment and training. So our office is continuing to keep an eye on, no offense to anyone in the room, but on recruiting younger election judges because we want to get kids involved in this process. And by kids, I mean people in their 20s. But, we want to be growing the base because regardless, we're still going to have polling places. We're still going to have voting on paper. And we're going to need, and if the congestion in the polling places continue, these proposals will hopefully decrease some of that congestion. Early voting, online voter reg, poll books, anything to streamline that process will help with the congestion in the polling places. But we're still going to need election judges that are well-trained and present to be there. As we see, there was another case where a few guys had registered and they didn't check the citizenship box and they got through anyway. And that's not, it's not election judge error necessarily. We just know that polling places are congested and it's difficult to keep track of everything that's happening. So any of these measures would benefit the voter, would provide cost savings to local election officials, and would streamline the process. And that's why we support them. And so I would be really super happy to answer any questions about any of these. Yes. Now, do y'all need to go to the mic, or can you just shout at me? Or it's funny that that's over there, but go ahead. What? Oh, yeah, no, that's great.
I'm curious to know if there was anything more done about reducing groups like the League of Women Voters from registering voters.
Oh, no. You mean like third-party voter registration laws?
Yes.
Yeah, so those have been moving forward in other states. But in our state, there's been no challenge to our voter registration laws, which is great, so that we can continue to have that process in place, and groups like the League can continue to register voters. So.
I think online voter registration would be great. I'm just wondering, how would a person's eligibility necessarily be confirmed in that process?
Right. So you could only use online voter registration if you had a verifiable number. You could only use online voter reg if you had a social security number or a driver's license. So you would type that in, and it would automatically ping to one of those databases to verify your identity. And then you would be, and that's what happens now when you register on paper, right? We put your DL in or your SOCIA, and it pings to either the Social Security Administration database or to the DL driver's license database. Only it's a check run at night, and then you're flagged. So you would get a little note that says you've registered, but confirmation of your voter registration will be sent to you. So you wouldn't just type your info in and just be automatically registered to vote, but we would confirm your information.
Different, but sort of related. If you were to expand the mail balloting and just simply send out a ballot to everybody, how can you prevent the fraudulent use or tossing of, or whatever, of somebody's ballot. So if a ballot comes to an address, who's to say who's actually voting it?
Right. Well, that's a good question. I mean, that's something that is a concern, but could be a concern with absentee voting as well. I mean, just to be clear, right now, mail balloting wouldn't go statewide. I mean, this is still limited to townships with under 1,000 people, or, but it's only mailed to registered voters' households, and it's only mailed non-forwardable. So, if you had moved, it wouldn't forward to you necessarily. It would go back. And there's still the witness. You have to have somebody witness that you filled it out. So there's still those protections in place. And I don't see us going to widespread mail balloting anytime soon. I mean, we don't even have a module yet in SVRS to track it. So this is still for very small cities and townships. But it works very well in those areas.
I've not been an election judge, so I may have this wrong, but you were talking about the issues around felons.
Yes.
And the question that I have is, how does an election judge know when someone comes in that they're a felon? Right now, I think the burden is on the felon to know they're not supposed to vote.
Right. The burden is on the felon. I mean, and during the photo ID debate, we sort of joked, like, nobody has on their license, hey, I'm a felon. Yeah. The onus is on them if they're registering on election day to know their status. If they're on the roster, they should be marked as challenged. They should have a C next to their name. Okay. Now, not always, because this current statute doesn't give us the broad, widespread data sharing that we need. But in most cases, they're challenged. And of course, you can overcome a challenge if you're like, no, really, I got off my probation yesterday, and I'm eligible. But that's how an election judge knows. But yeah, I mean, part of the problem is I could walk into the polling place and be on probation. You would have no idea. How would you know? And if I'm not keeping track of my civil rights or my probation time, I mean, how do I know? So it's been a problem.
A question from Lynn in the back.
Oh, sure.
Wanted to know what bipartisan support means. Does that mean a percentage, or does that mean co-authorship for a bill?
That is the million-dollar question this year. What does it mean? So the governor has said everything has to have broad bipartisan support. And depending on who you talk to, broad means half a Republican votes for it, or broad means authorship. So I actually do not know at this point how it's going to be defined. I mean, I don't think it necessarily has to mean that that there has to be bipartisan authors on the bill, like two different parties as authors. I do expect that it means that it's going to have to get votes on the floor from both parties, or at least come out of committee with bipartisan support.
I had a question about early voting.
Yes.
When they put their ballot into the ballot box, how is that going to work? Does the election judge have to retally?
Right. That's a great question, and I should have clarified that from the beginning. The votes will not be tallied until Election Day, just as they are now. So it's not like on Tuesday the week before somebody would be like, Romney has 200 votes and Obama has 400 votes in this precinct. It wouldn't work that way. They would be run through the machine but not tabulated. So they would run the tapes on Election Day just as they do now.
And could I ask another question for Hennepin County? Will we be getting new machines?
Yes. I can't speak definitively for Hennepin, but I know that they're testing new equipment and that their certification is on the way. So hopefully, yes. Why? Were there problems?
Hi, you had said that one of the reasons for early voting is to reduce the cost. Mm-hmm. And could you explain how that would be less than what we're currently doing for absentee ballots,
Sure,
I guess?
Of course. So with absentee voting currently, you have the cost of the postage to mail out the ballots. You have the cost of the envelopes, which is, every absentee ballot has 4 envelopes and forms attached to it. You have the cost of the absentee ballot board, which has to meet to accept or reject the ballot, and then meet again to open the ballot, process the ballot, put it through the machine. You have the cost of, if the ballot's been rejected, of resending the ballot back out, so that's postage again, and then receiving another ballot and going through the whole process again with a second ballot. So what will happen is if you have that process in place, but in the last 15 days before the election, you allow people to come and vote in person, then the number of people who might have otherwise voted using that whole process with the forms and the envelopes and the postage will simply come into the polling, come into their county auditor's office, fill out a ballot, and put it through the machine. So the cost there is simply the cost of the staff, who are going to need to be there anyway, and possibly in some jurisdictions the cost of equipment, because we still vote optical scan. They're going to need enough optical scan, in St. Louis Park to handle all the precincts or whatever.
But that assumes that folks can, because a lot of the absentee balloting that I see in the city of Golden Valley, people come into City Hall and vote absentee.
Right.
There's not the mail exchange.
Right.
So,
but even if you come and vote in person absentee, you're still filling out those forms, filling out the envelopes. They're still processing the envelopes. They're still waiting to run them until Election Day. So there's still that cost associated with in-person absentee.
so then let's leave that for a while. I have another question about absentee balloting. With all of the checking of the absentee ballot that goes on prior to Election Day, aren't those voters being afforded a level of scrutiny on their ballot and protection that isn't available to people that vote on Election Day?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that both processes have the same level of integrity built in. So in the polling place, you come in, you sign the oath, you vote your ballot. Those ballots are reconciled at the end of the night. With absentee voting, the process of filling out the envelopes is similar in that you're just identifying yourself so that they can find you an SVRS, which is essentially the same as signing the poll book. And you're signing that oath. And because we also allow people who are not registered to vote to register and vote absentee, they're just doing the same process as an Election Day registrant in the polling place. The additional piece with absentee voters is that they have somebody witness that they're filling out their ballot, which in the polling place is being given the receipt, being given the ballot, and then putting your ballot in the box. So I'm not sure the level of scrutiny is too much different. The level of scrutiny comes down to, with the absentee balloting process, they can't accept that ballot unless you filled that form out correctly. So there's that extra level. What they're not really scrutinizing the ballot, they're scrutinizing that form, which is also a little bit problematic because no one reads directions, as far as I can tell, and they don't fill out the form the right way, and it gets rejected. And it gets rejected because they forgot their address, or the witness signed the wrong box, or, so it's a lot of hassle without actually additional integrity built into it, because they're really just saying, this is me and my address, and here's my witness name.
And then lastly, has any consideration been given to online voter registration and how that might be considered to be discriminatory and disenfranchising a level of population that isn't comfortable with the internet or having online access?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So it wouldn't only be online registration. I mean, you could still certainly register by paper. I mean, that process will always be I say that, but I think the paper registration process will always be in place.
This is a curiosity question, but do you know how many states still have caucuses, and has there ever been chatter about getting rid of the caucus in Minnesota?
So that's an interesting question. I don't know how many other states have caucuses right off the top of my head. I mean, not that many, right? This is a party question because the parties are in charge of those processes. And I hear a lot of chatter both ways about the benefits and the non-benefits of the caucus system. But as far as I can tell, people seem to have pride that we still have a caucus system and they don't want it to go away. So, I mean, I can't really speak to that because we don't govern it because it is the parties. I mean, it'd be interesting to see if they do move the primary to June, if that would change when the caucuses met or a little bit how they did their operating. But I think that we're going to have a caucus system for a while.
Has there been any polling with the people to see if there's support for getting rid of caucuses?
Not that I know of, though that would be an interesting thing to push on your parties to do. I mean, I haven't seen, with the exception of 2008, at least anecdotally, I haven't seen a lot of increased participation in the caucus system. You know, I mean, a lot of people came out in 2008. That was an anomaly, I think. So if people continue not to participate, well, I mean, clearly it benefits some people if people don't participate in the process and not others. So.
In regards to the early primary, was there any discussion or was there any testimony about one of the concerns would be is that legislators would need to be campaigning during legislative session?
Would be campaigning while they were in session. Yes, and the legislators themselves have brought up that concern. So yeah, like I was just speaking with one, another high-level rep the other day, and he said, you know, there have been years when I've taken really hard votes during session, and if I had been, you know, up for re-election that same month, I would have not held my seat. You know, but when they wait till August, things kind of die down, and then, well, I mean, and August is still relatively new. I mean, you know, we're still sort of adjusting to an August primary.
Well, and there's August and there's June, and July is not on the table at all?
As far as I know, July is not on the table. People are at their cabins. It's Minnesota. No, early June or late August. That's all I've heard. But who knows? I mean, who knows what they'll come out with.
I'd just like you to address on this sheet it says changes to process and procedures relating to amending the Constitution. Could you address that?
Sure, of course. And I have to say, I'm not really sure where this is right now in terms of the political landscape, because it's not in the elections bill, certainly. But there was a push to amend the amendment process following last year's amendment process. So what was introduced was a bill that would require a larger majority to vote to amend the Constitution, and which would allow, I think, the governor a little bit more power in terms of vetoing amendments. And there were several versions of this bill moving around, and I don't know where it is right now. I think they dropped it just for a little while. I think everybody was tired of talking about constitutional amendments. There is a judicial amendment, I think, still moving through to reform the way that we elect judges, but I have not been paying very much attention to where it is right now. Anything else? That's like all of it, right?
Well, please join me in thanking Claire Wilson for coming today.
Oh, thank you all. That was fun.
This is the end of our program. Thank you for coming. If you want further information on the League of Women Voters, please sign at the table in the back of the room or visit lwvmn.org. Thank you to the City of St. Louis Park for the use of their council chambers, and to Reg for taping the program. The program can be found on the St. Louis Park website. Thank you so much.